Did you know that your foot is approximately the same length as your elbow to your wrist?
Welcome to the Lore of the South.
Follow the show on social media to keep up with what's going on and to see pics that go along with each episode. Search for Lore of the South on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook.
Welcome back, y'all. Welcome back to Lore of the South. It has been a minute. Like, a bunch of them. Like months, even. But thank y'all for hanging out and waiting for us. We really do appreciate it. That little funny did you know came from my friend up in North Carolina, Christian Rappendolph. And let's see, what do we need to do? Oh, it's been so long. I hope I can get back up on this horse. Let's see. I don't know about all y'all, but so far the 2020s, they seem like an age or maybe even an era onto itself. Maybe our alien overlords hit some switch at the end of 2019 and they switched the timeline up. It's like we're replaying the Dark Ages, but in modern times. It's a wild time to be alive, y'all, but I guess every generation says that. One of the reasons is we've been paused for so long is Kelly hit her mid-40s. And y'all, this has been a wild ride on its own, truth be told. I went from a rage queen to wanting to only be positive to spending entire days crying. It was ridiculous. I was so fed up with myself. But anyways, we think we have it sorted. Thank God for modern medicine, such as it is. But yeah, I'm feeling much better. But yeah, kids are doing good. Grandma's good. Producer Mike still in the Pepperidge Farm business. Congrats to my sister. She got married in June. She was a beautiful bride. And y'all, I haven't been to very many weddings. I was raised an only child. I have one half sibling. I have a ton of cousins, but haven't been to very many weddings. But hers was great. It was beautiful. It was such a blast. It was fun. I'll have to share a couple photos from it, I guess. We'll see. We'll see if I'll do that or not. With that little catch-up session done, we'll jump right into some history-making news. How about that? This little bit of history comes to us from Atlas Obscura. This is a brief list of all the ills that turpentine could cure. Side note, do not ingest turpentine. We use it as a paint thinner for a reason. But at one time, turpentine battled with cotton to be the king of the South. The British were the first to start the turpentine commercial industry in North America. It was one of the reasons that General James Oglethorpe gave in and allowed for Georgia to become a slave-owning colony. It was super rigorous and long process to draw the sap from the longleaf pine trees. Then the cooking down of the sap, it would be hot and dangerous. But the uses of turpentine from pre-colonial days up until recent history, y'all, hold on to your butts for this one. We'll start it with a quote from Dr. Thomas D. Clark. Turpentine had 3 important medical requisites. It smelled loud, it tasted bad, and it burned like the woods were on fire. So, here's y'all's list of what all the old uses of turpentine were. They used it to seal wood decking on ships. The fumes they thought were good for lung health. They still put turpentine in Vicks Vapor Rub today. They used it to flavor bathtub gin, which was a popular thing during Prohibition era. They also thought it would cure something they called neuralgia, and I think that's the same as what we call neuropathy today, like pins and needles, tingling, pain in your extremities kind of thing. A lot of diabetics have it. It could also cure your headache, toothache, sore throat, lame back, corns, bruises, sprains, cramps, colic, which was gas, diarrhea, pain, or inflammation. This one got me, y'all. They thought it could cure diphtheria. Diphtheria was nasty, and that's why we have vaccines, y'all, because it killed a ton of kids. The more common uses would be for a dewormer, and they would take it orally. And it might kill your worms, but there's a chance it's going to get you too. during the Patreon, our little after show that we do, I will have to tell you the family lore about turpentine use in probably the 60s or 70s. It's kind of a funny story. And speaking of our Patreon, I owe a huge thank you to Miss Judy, L, Sydney, and Taryn. Y'all are the reason that this is going out. I appreciate each of you. Y'all standing by me means a lot. It really does, because I know it's been a minute. Anyways, thank you, ladies. I really do appreciate y'all. Okay, y'all ready? Let's get on with the show. We're headed up to Chattanooga for this one. It seems like forever ago that we were there, just like everything is forever ago now. But it was such an interesting place. We really enjoyed our few days there. Everywhere we went, we heard Chattanooga, where the cotton meets the corn. What else might one already know about this city on the banks of the Tennessee River? It's the biggest railroad hub in the South, north of Atlanta. The old song Chattanooga Choo Choo, I think we're all familiar with it. It was a place that the Native Americans avoided because it was prone to flooding. In other words, they knew at certain times of the year you avoided this area. But that didn't stop the Europeans from having a go at it. The rivers were the original highways, and it was the easy way for the farmers to get their products to market. Cotton came up from the south and headed to the mills in the north, and the north was sending corn and other products to the south to feed the masses and livestock. It moved from manpower to steam, then the railroad came. It's what joined the four corners of this country together. And so I'm going to read a little excerpt from ChattanoogaHistory.com. This is just a little blurb about the founding of Chattanooga. I thought they did a great job of explaining it, and I was like, hey, we don't need to rewrite this. On December 20th, 1839, the Tennessee General Assembly incorporated the town of Chattanooga. In 1816, brothers John and Lewis Ross established the settlement of Ross's Landing. Here, a trading post consisting of a warehouse and a ferry landing site were built. The early residents met and voted to change the name of Ross's Landing to Chattanooga in 1838. The meaning of the name Chattanooga. Other than it being derived from the Cherokee, historians are not in complete agreement on the origin of the name, Chattanooga. Some hold that it derives from a word describing the nearby majestic Lookout Mountain as rock coming to a point. Some from the Indian word for hawk's nest, and others from the Indian name, ooh, y'all, they gonna get me, Tatanoogie. So it sounds like it was just another white man's mispronunciation that led to the naming of Chattanooga. But, you know, the more you know, guys. As early as 1793, maps show an Indian village and a creek by the name of Chattanooga, and it was at the foot of Lookout Mountain. During the Civil War, Chattanooga was a prize to be won. It was the gateway to the rest of the South. Literally a natural barrier, that is Lookout Mountain, stood in the North's way. But all those converging rail lines could make a general drool. What a prize. So, in what would become known as the Battle of Chickamauga, or Lookout Mountain, the Yankees, as they were known then, set out to lose a battle, but they won the city of Chattanooga. They were against locals in their own territory, but they still managed to take out a good number of the Confederates, including my great-great-great-grandfather, Alabama infantryman Hansel Dickens. So, from September 19th-ish, 1863, through the Reconstruction, Chattanooga was in Northern hands. Okay, so I'm going to pause for a second on Chattanooga's history so that I could relay more of Chattanooga's history involving the Crutchfield House that would later become the Reed Hotel. It began with a pair of log cabins for the family of Thomas Crutchfield. Thomas, his wife Sarah, and their 4 children settled into the log cabins in the early 1830s, just as the Cherokee were being rounded up and death marched west. He was a surveyor, a builder, and all-around businessman. he helped to clear and plot the streets of Chattanooga. He built the first brick kiln there with his brother. These bricks were used to build Colonel James Whiteside. And I Googled and couldn't find out what he was the colonel of. If he didn't serve, it may have been an honorific title like Colonel Sanders. Whiteside was a native of Kentucky, so maybe he was a Kentucky colonel. I'm not sure, couldn't find the info. The next mansion on Cameron Hill to go up was that for Dr. Milo Smith. Crutchfield then also established the first brick front store, and then, along with men like Whiteside, they were huge proponents of building up a Tennessee railroad, so that Tennessee, I think it would become like the Tennessee and Kentucky line or something like that. They backed the building of the railroads, and they spent a lot of time in Nashville to get the state, to come on board with them and help them fund this project. So after Crutchfield built the mansions and the storefront, he went on to build his railroad hotel, the Crutchfield House. It was a 3-story wonder in the up-and-coming city. Thomas even had a platform of sorts built in the treetops so that he could have a bird's-eye view of the construction below. The hotel opened in 1847. It was a prime location right across from the train station terminal. And I'm sure there were some backroom decisions and all kinds of stuff happening in the back of the Crutchfield House, because it was the biggest building in town, so that means that's where all the meetings took place. Especially pre-Civil War South. There had to be some stuff going on. Thomas Crutchfield passed away in the winter of 1850 at the age of 49. His son would carry on the operation of the hotel in his place. In 1861, as the first shots of the Civil War were popping off, and Jeff Davis, the only president of the Confederacy, was fleeing from D.C. After he left his seat in the Senate, his first stop on the train from there was the Crutchfield House. Apparently, the Crutchfield House was a divided one, like the rest of the South, and especially border states like Tennessee, Kentucky. Thomas Jr. was a Southern sympathizer. His younger brother, William, would not so much. When Jefferson Davis made his stop, he gave a speech in the hotel lobby to a good-sized crowd. All accounts today say of the speech is that it was a pretty moderate one for that of a slave-owning senator. But Thomas's younger brother wasn't having it. As I said, it was a divided crowd. And William heard enough. He broke through the crowd, climbed up on a counter, and exclaimed for one and all to hear that Jefferson Davis was a coward and a traitor. Y'all, those are fighting words. Especially in the 1860s. So from what I read, Thomas got a hold of his brother William and got him out of the building before a riot could break out. Probably saving a lot of bloodshed, because I think Jefferson Davis was about ready to, the handkerchief slap? Is that what it is? The gauntlet? Throw the gauntlet in. He was going to ask for satisfaction. He wanted a duel. So if Thomas hadn't gotten him out of there when he did, it would have gone a lot different. So war reaches their doorstep in 1863, as I mentioned before about the Battle of Chickamauga. The brothers were practically estranged. When the fighting broke out, William joined the Union forces as a major or maybe an honorary captain. I read conflicting things, so I'm putting both of them in here. But after the first day of battle, William became ill and couldn't continue his service. He was in bed for about a week or so. And it was years later before he found out that his beloved wife loved the South as much as he might have loved the U.S. Apparently, she poisoned him to keep him out of the fight. It's not what he wanted, but she kept him at home and alive, I guess. But she could have also killed her husband. But anyways, people do weird, desperate things, guys. The hotel, in the hand of new owners now, lost it all in the war. The hotel was the first place confiscated by the Union, and they turned it into a hospital. It was the second wife of Colonel Whiteside that we talked about earlier, who led a team of women to sew up makeshift mattresses for the wounded. They cared for the men in both uniforms, wrote final letters, and held the hands of the dying. After the war, in March 1867, Chattanooga was hit by a catastrophic flood. The entire city was underwater. Research says that the river crested at 58 feet above normal, and for 4 days the river rose about a foot an hour. AI tells me that the water levels would have been about a half as tall as what the Chattanooga, Tennessee Aquarium. It would have been halfway up the building, and y'all, it's enormous. It is a beautiful thing. I'll have to show pictures of the building so y'all can see how high that water went. Those who took refuge in the upper floors of the Crutchfield house said that the small fishing boats floating in the lobby. Foundations were undermined, homes were swept away or collapsed. The only bridge that connected one side of the city to the other was swept away. The telegraph lines were all washed away. They were a town with no way of communicating or a way to warn people further downstream about the impending flood. The neighboring farmland and livestock were all in the flood's path. City officials said at the time there was no way to even estimate the lives and livelihoods that were lost. In 1891, the town finally got a new bridge, and it was known as the Walnut Street Bridge. The city also raised the street level of the city itself. You could think back to like the Galveston episode, and we talked about them building up the island. I think they built it up by like 17 feet. So they went as tall as a building. They raised it 12 feet. But how they raised the level of the city might not have been the best of methods. We noticed nearly everywhere that we walked, we could see the tops of buildings coming out of the ground. They kind of look like basement windows, but they didn't go anywhere. You couldn't really get into them. It was odd. It was really odd, but kind of cool. So there were still all of these buildings, like the remains of them, some still standing, maybe compromised. But so what they did, instead of demolishing everything first, they just filled in the cracks, so to speak. They brought in fill dirt and just covered up the old buildings that were there and raised the grade by about 12 feet, it was said. This wasn't going to be good for Chattanooga's future. Spoiler alert, doing this may be like building a town on top of a man-made sinkhole. So that's kind of what they did to Chattanooga. The newer buildings are now built on top of old places that are disintegrating underneath their foundations. So there's been a few places that have collapsed there. One of them, a tour guide was telling us about, that it happened not too long before we were there, and it just happened to happen on a holiday and nobody was in there when it happened. You would think, though, you would have some kind of warning that a brick building was fixing to come down. Maybe not. I don't know. I'm not a mason. So the Crutchfield house, it managed to survive the flood, but a fire would take it later that year. In another 4 years, the city showed signs of recovery. The railroad was pushing forward, and the Crutchfield house land was purchased by Dr. John T. Reed and his son Samuel. Their plan was to make the Reed house the star of Chattanooga. And y'all, they did it. They had marble, inlaid terrazzo floors, floor-to-ceiling mirrors recessed into rich paneling. Y'all, it was the mid-1870s, and we were in the Gilded Age. Big, bold, gaudy, and golden. The hotel held its big grand opening on New Year's Day in 1872, and in 1875, the city was hit by another flood. This time, the Reed Hotel was left in disrepair. 1925, and the hotel changes hands again, and it's the Roaring Twenties. The hotel was expanded to cover a city block. And when you visit today, it's like stepping back in time 100 years. Upon its completion, about a year later, it stood 10 stories tall, contained 400 hotel rooms, and they all started at $250 a night. The project took about $2.5 million to complete, and those are kind of the stats on the updated Reed Hotel. Two things come to my mind during this time period: Prohibition and the rise of the mob. And here comes the Great Depression, right behind all of it. Coca-Cola was first introduced at the hotel pharmacy, and the hotel having a pharmacy kind of makes me think they were using it as a way to get around Prohibition. That was a fairly common practice back then. So the property from the 20s to the current day hotel changed hands about 4 more times over the decades, undergone numerous renovations, and it's now a Sheraton property. So y'all ready for the spookies? Here we go. From the history of the area, y'all can gather that this spot has earned its place in haunted history. Soldiers are spotted in the oldest parts of the hotel, some looking decidedly injured. Others claim the feeling of being watched, cold breezes, shadowy figures. But the spooky star of the Reed Hotel is room number 311. And y'all, this room is so notorious, the hotel only rents it out during like the Halloween season, like from like September through November 1st. But you can't stay in it except for that short period of time during the year. But it's so popular, the haunting of room 311, that the hotel employs full-time tour guides just to take people up to go see room 311. And he was a trip. It was a neat experience. But you know what? If you want to hear more about that, Patreon, $3 a month, y'all. We're cheaper than gas station coffee. So, this room is supposed to be the most active spot in the hotel. And the ghost story goes like this. It was the early 1920s, and a businessman from Chicago comes down to work and brings his lovely new bride with him. Kind of a business honeymoon trip. She's known today by the name Annalisa. They had a grand time of it, but then the husband gets called away on more business, and he leaves his new, beautiful young bride in her suite of rooms in the care of the Reed house. Well, he was gone longer than expected, and Annalisa got bored. She'd been seen out around town with numerous young men, and the hotel employees were shocked by her wildness and promiscuity. But she was a paying guest with a rich husband, so they kept their comments to themselves. But when the groom did eventually return to his bride, I can imagine he was probably greeted with some sly glances or embarrassed looks from the other patrons and the staff. He'd have had no idea of what his wife had been up to, but it didn't take long to figure out, and he left again the same night. The next day, the cleaning staff enters to refresh the room. There's an odd metallic smell in the air, like copper pennies. So they tidied the sitting room, then they moved into the next room, the bedroom, making the bed, and the last room in the suite is the ensuite bathroom. There was no way that they could have even imagined what they were fixing to uncover. There lay Annalisa naked, as the day she was born, in a claw-footed tub. Her head was at an odd angle, and wasn't it strange that she didn't call out to let the cleaners know that she was indisposed? They call to her, and they step over the threshold and into a crime scene. Annalisa's neck had been sliced nearly clean through with a man's shaving razor. The maid flees the room, but gathers herself enough to call the lobby desk from the room's newly installed telephone. I don't think there was much of an investigation. She was a rich Yankees wife who got up to no good. And like in most places, money talks. Not that I know of, no one was ever arrested. So it seems that Annalisa may still be carrying out her residency as a permanent guest. Visitors to the room and those who have stayed in there have all reported down at the desk the next morning if they didn't leave or flee like the maids did in the middle of the night. So the reports from the room, the claims are cold spots, the feelings of being watched, the faucets turning on by themselves and the toilet flushing. But then there's the men who are pushed, scratched, and slapped. She seems to really have an otherworldly distaste for men. An article from Ghost City says she especially has a distaste for men who smoke. So y'all don't step in there smelling like a bowling alley from the 80s. Or maybe do and see what happens. Your choice. Ugh, This has been a long time coming. I hope everyone enjoyed the episode. Thank y'all for sticking with us. And if you're new, welcome and thank you for listening. Oh, and here's a list of famous people who have graced the current read in the old Crutchfield house. Okay, I'm going to do these rapid fire, y'all. Ulysses S. Grant, Rutherford B. Hayes, Grover Cleveland, Theodore Roosevelt, William McKinley, Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, Edwin Booth, who was the brother of Lincoln's assassin, Gene Autry, Elvis Presley, Oprah Winfrey, Gary Cooper, Winston Churchill, Bing Crosby, Walt Disney, Bob Hope, and Al Capone. What state did I leave off with in our oldest building by state? Brought to us by the Discoverer blog. Gotta make sure I credit people. Let's see, where are we at? Oh my gosh, we're on the last two. Okay, we're in Wisconsin, and it's the Tank Cottage. It was built by a French-Canadian fur trapper on the banks of the Fox River. And our very last state is Wyoming and Fort Laramie, and it's the Fossil Cabin. So the author of the article explains that this isn't the oldest building, but it's made from the oldest materials. It's literally built from dinosaur fossils. And it was built to attract visitors to the gas station that served nearby tourists. It's not exactly known when it was built, but it was definitely in the 20th century. Thank you to author of the article, Julia Hammond, a travel writer for thediscoverer.com. All right, y'all, we're going to call that an episode. I hope you enjoyed it. It's not my normal format, I don't think. I was kind of a little bit chronological. My chronological order was a bit off, and that kind of bugs me. But honestly, with it being the first one back, I just really wanted to get it done for y'all. Okay, again, thank y'all for joining us for this 84th episode. If you like what you heard, consider joining the Patreon. Like I said, we cheaper than gas station coffee, $3 a month. You get one extra episode a month. And after each regular episode that airs, you will also get a recap episode with producer Mike and I, where we sit and discuss the topic. And he also joins me for each of the Patreon episodes after, I think, like the second or third one, I think. So if you enjoy that, if you enjoy when producer Mike makes an appearance, look into the Patreon. We have a good time over there. The girls are so much fun. Anyways, y'all think about it. Follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram. I always post pics to go along with every episode. Producer Mike, he likes to do the TikToks. Our episodes also get uploaded onto YouTube if you'd like to listen that way. You can email us if you have show ideas, or you just want a shout out, or maybe you have a did you know to share. Just a random fact. You can just email me a random fact, and as long as it's PG-13, I'll probably put it on here. Anyways, y'all, thank y'all so much for sticking with us and for joining us for this episode. And with that, we will talk to y'all on the next episode of Lore of the South. Bye, y'all.
If you loved what you heard, check out the Patreon page for exclusive content by searching for The Lore of the South on patreon.com.